So I always believed that grids were too expensive. So voxel grids, right? So 2D it's pixels, 3D it's voxels. I thought it was always too expensive. And then in '97, I had to review a paper for SIGGRAPH, and it was the Foster Metaxas paper.
This podcast is sponsored by Siemens Digital Industry Software. Learn more about their simulation and test solutions by clicking the links in the description. Build a better tomorrow faster with SimCenter. Welcome to a new episode of the Engineered Mind podcast. I'm your host Jousef, and on this podcast I'm talking to researchers, scientists and engineers and how their work is shaping the world around us. For this episode, I'm very delighted to welcome a computer graphics legend, namely Jos Stam, to my show. Jos is a researcher in the field of computer graphics, focusing on the simulation of natural physical phenomena for 3D computer animation. In this very interesting podcast, Jos and I talk about his famous stable fluids paper, how Jos thinks about academia and conducting research. Jos talks about his Oscar awards, the fascination for art and fluid dynamics, and so much more. If you would like to support the podcast, make sure you give this episode a like and leave a comment down below to make sure the ominous algorithm is suggesting the video to more inquisitive scientists all around the world. Subscribe if you haven't already. And now, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy my podcast with the one and only Jos Stam. How was your day so far, Jos?
Very good.
Yeah.
Kind of a rainy day here in Geneva. Apart from that, nothing special.
Ready to head into the weekend, I guess, right?
Yeah. Although kind of working from home seems like every day is a weekend.
That's true. Yeah, that's completely true. Anyway, Jos, thank you so much for doing this. By the way, you have been requested from a lot of people, and I think with that we can kick off the show, Jos. Today we have Jos Stam on the show. To some famous, to some a little bit unknown. Can you give the audience maybe like a 1 or maybe 2 minute bio? Who are you, Jos, and what is your background?
Only 1 minute? No, I'm joking. So I'm a researcher for the last 30 years. So probably the audience knows what a researcher is. You have to come up with new ideas. So instead of going to academia, I got a PhD, so I know academia. I went into industry. And so I've been doing research in algorithms that can help the various companies I worked for. So currently I work as a research scientist for NVIDIA. Your audience might know about them. They're chip makers, but they're also for graphics, right? So I used to work for Silicon Graphics, for example, and sort of NVIDIA took over that market. And they're also very interested in AI. Maybe we can talk about that later.
Yeah, 100%. Yes. Yeah. When I was doing a little bit of research about you, Jos, it was kind of funny. So you had that one-liner on your homepage which says, I write computer code, think mathematically, and dream in images, which I think was a bit funny. Could you maybe explain like why you dream in images and where does this fascination for images or art come from?
Oh, people ask me because I speak many languages, right?
Yeah.
Just because of my background, where I grew up. And people always ask me, in what language do you dream? And the easy answer is no, I don't dream in languages. At least as far as I can remember when I wake up. I dream in images. What I remember from dreams are images. And sometimes very vivid images. So I'm more of a visual person.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I speak many languages, I'm less vocal, if you want. It's easier for me to express myself in figures and images than in language, even though I speak many languages. So.
Yeah. It feels like a bit like that you're, I don't want to say, but it feels like you're a bit like Picasso, where you have like this childlike obsession and want to fiddle with things, keep discovering things. Would you say that you are like that as a person? Very inquisitive?
Yeah, I think, some people say you never grew up. To me, that's a compliment.
That's a compliment.
Because, or you ask too many questions. Because I want to figure things out, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we could talk about that later. I like to take very complex problems and sort of understand them, and then hopefully give simple solutions to them. Whatever solution is, right? So it's open to debate. But yeah, sure. I think this childlike wonder of the world, it's sad that people lose that.
Yeah. I'm really much interested why that is, because I feel like when we visit the world for the first time as children, we are actually like a bundle of emotions. We come to this place, we want to fiddle with things, we want to explore things, but society, or like education, or whatever you want to call it, are trying to push us into this like path and don't think left and right, but actually just follow what we prescribe and don't think outside the box. Do you think because you're kind of a, maybe I would say, rebellious person, or not fitting into the society as people would assume you actually should, that you have been successful because of that, because you're like a bit of renitent, a bit rebellious, childlike? What would you say?
I'm a fairly agreeable person, but I definitely don't fit into society. Just because of my height. I'm 2'3". That's 6'8" for people in North America. And I grew up in Switzerland. So definitely I didn't fit in. That's not the whole thing. Being a good researcher is thinking differently. It's not always easy, but that's how you get interesting results. But you get a lot of pushback too, right? People will not accept your results if you go against the grain. But I'm not interested in incremental research, right? Where you take known ideas. Anyone can do that. I mean, not anyone. You have to be smart to have a PhD. But that doesn't interest me. Maybe because I'm lazy. I like to plant seeds, different ideas. Of course, 99.9% of them go nowhere, but maybe they will after a couple of years. So it's just good to try. And that's sort of been my career. And I'm very lucky that companies pay me money for doing this research, but it also makes them money. So
yeah,
it's what I like to say is I work with a company, not for a company. It's a relation.
That also gives you maybe psychologically that freedom, because you're saying you're working with them and not for them.
Your freedom is the most important thing, especially in the Western world. We don't want to lose that. Of course, it has limits, right? But I try to maximize that. It's an optimization problem, right? You try to maximize your freedom, but on the other hand, there are many constraints, and actually, that makes your freedom more valuable if there are constraints, right? Like you mentioned Picasso. Well, he couldn't paint anything. He was restricted to paints, a canvas. And that's how true creativity comes in. Now, I would say mathematics is probably, because I studied mathematics, or I have a degree in mathematics, is the most difficult, because there's so many constraints. It has to be logical, consistent, to follow a proof. And to be creative in mathematics, to me, is the greatest achievement. Not that I've achieved it at the level of Fields medalist, but I think you cannot be creative without constraints. Okay?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, but before we talk about research, maybe the research that you have done in the stable fluid paper, which a lot of people know, because I know a few people and also people or friends, they have implemented it in various different languages, which is really, really interesting. But maybe going back to your maybe childhood or what you studied, how was your upbringing like? Because I feel like this podcast is not only about technical topics, about mathematics and constraints and so on and optimization problems, but also how was your upbringing like? How did the fascination for art and fluid mechanics develop? I think that would be interesting to know.
Sure. So you want to be my psychiatrist?
I'm a podcaster. I'm just a podcaster, which could be a psychiatrist.
No, but it's an interesting question. So, roughly speaking, I was always interested in art.
Mm-hmm.
So as a high school student, I would draw caricatures of my professors and other crazy stuff. And basically, 1 year so I grew up in Switzerland, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much, and in the 70s, 80s. In those years, you could fill a year. I don't think that happens anymore. But I almost filled a year because my math grades were the lowest. Because I was subjected to boring math.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, I was only interested in art. So I come from a family with one older brother and two sisters. My older brother was the scientist, labeled as a scientist. I was labeled as the artist. So my interest was more in art. I used to paint with the airbrush. So there's some technical aspect in there. I used to like to fix mopeds and bikes. So that's also kind of technical. And that's very similar to fixing bugs. You have to figure out what went wrong. And if you figure out where it went wrong, then fixing that bug is pretty obvious. But anyway, so I have had this background in art. I even sold some paintings with the airbrush. So I was in my teens, and then my older brother, who was more the scientist in the family, he told me, take a course, because back then, in the high schools in Geneva, at least, where I grew up in Switzerland, there were no formal computer science lessons. You had to take them during lunch. And my brother said, take these lessons because it will give you a good job for the summer. So it's very cynical how I started in computer science to make money. But that's not what excited me about computer science.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's nice to make money. And at first I didn't get it. So I took the course because my big brother said, do it. Very nicely, by the way. And so I took the course. First of all, I couldn't type on the keyboard. So we typed in a program that created random numbers. Wow, that's exciting. Not really if you're used to all the crazy stories of the surrealist and Dali. So I went back home and told my brother, this is not for me. And he explained to me, and then I finally understood what a computer is. It's this very dumb thing that does everything you tell it to do. Okay, people who believe in AI will tell me otherwise. But that was my first impression. And then I understood it. It's like, wow, I can control this, and it's infinite. But within constraints. Like when I was painting with the airbrush, there were strong constraints. But it seemed computers were almost infinitely, the possibilities were infinite. So anyway, I'm going to fast forward. Then I found out that this field, computer graphics, so that was later, a couple years after that. And I said, wow. So you can create, because in my art, I'm not going to show it here, but basically, of course, it was teenage angst, obsessions about things, and inspired by Dali and Magritte, other artists. But what I was most interested in is the technique, how to render things, perspective. So I bought books about perspective and it's like vanishing lines and all that. And then I discovered ray tracing. It does everything for you.
Mm-hmm.
The computer takes care of all these details. So, and you have to imagine this was back in 1983, 84. No, wait, later, 87. I got one of the first Amigas. Those of you who are my age, well, the younger people probably don't know about the Amiga. It was an amazing revolution. So anyway, I got an Amiga, thanks to my dad. And it was an amazing machine. Although ray tracing a sphere would take a day overnight. But I saw the beauty of it, and then I discovered... Maybe you have a question, and I'm talking too much here?
No, it's fine. All good. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm just telling my story, right? So, and then someone pointed me to the SIGGRAPH proceedings. So for those of you who don't know, SIGGRAPH is the main conference in computer graphics.
Mm.
And back then they had proceedings. Now it's all online. And I looked at it, and it's like, I looked at the pictures, like, yeah, it's very primitive, but... And then I read the papers, and they were full of mathematics, which I was studying at the time.
Mm.
And that was sort of the link between... this can kind of bridge. You know, a lot of people coming out of high school, they don't know what to do. For me, it was clear. This is what I want to do. Combine mathematics and creating pictures. And so this was in my last year as an undergrad in Geneva, or 2 years before that. So I was studying computer science and mathematics at the same time, so dual degree. And then I'm asking, where do people do this research? You know?
Mm-hmm.
On the computer graphics. And it turned out places like Cornell, Caltech, Berkeley, mainly in the US, and top schools. So why would... I had stellar grades, and I want to brag about that. It just happened so. Because if you're motivated about something, I really love mathematics. So if you study it well and you pass the exams. So my grades were okay, but... So I applied to all these schools in the US and to the University of Toronto because someone in our lab knew Eugene Fume, who became my supervisor, by the way. And if you don't... For example, these schools get thousands of applications, right? And then they have this guy, Jos Stam, who got top grades in the University of Geneva. Okay, fair enough. We have 1,000 people from Beijing with higher grades. So they all rejected me. Let's put it that way. It's okay. It was a bit rough, but anyway, I had Eugene Fume, who was a professor at the University of Toronto. I went to visit them in 1988, and they were very super friendly. And it really helps to have a human contact. So I think I met him before that, and I showed him my work. And so you would have to talk to him. But his story is that my file of application was below the bottom. And he said, what about this guy, Jos Stam? Oh, yeah, we have this application here. He said, you should get it. So that's how I ended up at the University of Toronto, which was actually one of the best places in the world for computer graphics. And so that's how I got into computer graphics.
Mm-hmm.
With real SGI machines. Maybe a lot of your audience doesn't know what they are. But they were the top machines. So you get the best toys. Actually, we had them in Geneva as well, but that's another story. Anyway, so I was in Toronto. And then I got my first SIGGRAPH paper in 93. That was my dream. And let's see, the rest is history. Probably have more questions about that.
Definitely, yeah. So fluid dynamics wasn't actually the main topic of your research. How did you delve or jump into this field? Like, how did you get interested in? I think one question, additional question, yours is mathematics did help you to understand fluid dynamics better. Would you say that? And also, how did you then get into this whole field of?
Let's get back to that. So in my paintings with the airbrush,
yeah,
I was always interested in clouds and fluids, and actually cloth, which I worked on later.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, my artistic interests were were always very technical and trying to depict natural phenomena. So when I came to Toronto, my first master's work was on controlling the shape of clouds. So I was always interested in fluids. And when I say fluids, it includes clouds. And it also includes solids.
Mm-hmm.
Because think of how the crust of the Earth moves around. You don't see it. So it's all about time scales.
Yeah.
But your question is, did the equations help? Yeah, so now we have to fast forward. So I was always interested in, and I had some papers at SIGGRAPH that were all about that topic. So in 93, I had a model about turbulent wind fields, how to model turbulence as a velocity field, and like a texture, a motion texture for turbulence. And then in 95, I had a paper about fire. But let's fast forward to your question of 99, the stable fluids, right? So I first got it to work in 97, actually.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole story behind it.
Please tell us that story, yes.
You want to hear the story?
Of course, yeah.
Okay. So in 97, I was living in Finland, in Helsinki, for 9 months. Before that, I lived in Paris. And so I always believed that grids were too expensive. So voxel grids, right? So 2D, it's pixels. 3D, it's voxels. I thought it was always too expensive. And then in 97, I had to review a paper for SIGGRAPH, and it was the Foster Metaxas paper, and it convinced back in the day you had VHS tapes. Right? I remember in Finland in the lab or at home, I can't remember. I put the VHS tape in the machine, whatever. And I saw the results and I said, this is it. This is it. Voxels is the way to go. So I, of course, gave the paper huge, super high marks. And then I was convinced I have to understand these Navier-Stokes equations more profoundly. And they're not easy to approach. And but in Finland, I was working on another problem, which was, given the velocity field, how do you move stuff in it on a grid? Because I was convinced that the grid is the right approach. It's limited, but you can't get the quality with particles. Of course, that has changed. It goes back and forth, right? I'm not trying to be religious about use grids, and in fact, a lot of techniques use both and interchange between them. And so I found this technique, which was rejected at SIGGRAPH in 97, of advecting, moving densities in a static field. And then, long story short, I came into Seattle and I said, why don't we treat the components U, V, I was working in 2D first, right? 1D is kind of boring because an incompressible fluid in 1D is either zero, this direction, or that direction. It's not very interesting. So 2D is more interesting. So I write all my prototypes in the lowest dimension possible. And so I said, okay, there's a U component and a V component. Let's treat them as densities and use the algorithm I wrote in Finland and see what happens. And I was lucky. Okay, I tried that. And I always like to work on interactive simulations. And I remember it was a morning in Seattle in June, I think. And it worked. It's the first time that anyone saw stable fluids. It was me. Of course, then I showed it to people and they're like, what is this? Because can I interact with it? And so that was the idea. And then it turns out it's a technique called stimulagrangian. At the time, I had no idea. And so it's a unconditional stable technique. It's kind of a actually, Jim Blinn, one of the legends in computer graphics. He used to do these commentary about the papers. So this was 1999 when stable fluids. I have another story about that. So when stable fluids, he said that's a contradiction in terms, stable fluids. So I thought it's pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
And but I'll tell you, I have many stories about stable fluids, of course. I don't know how many stories you want to hear.
How did you come up with the name, by the way, Jos? Stable fluids.
Oh, that's because it's actually a true story. In 1999, I had another paper called diffraction shaders.
Mm-hmm.
So some people might be familiar with the paper. So it kind of unifies. So I've worked on many fields, right? I think it's because I come from different cultures. I don't know. I'm just interested in many things.
Yeah.
So I made some contributions, not just fluids. But anyway, so I wanted this simple name. Maybe it's because I was hanging out with marketing guys, drinking beers with them. I don't know. But it seemed like an interesting name, like diffraction shaders. I submitted diffraction shaders the year before. It was a very scientific sounding name, like I forgot now. It got rejected, and but I learned a lot from it. It's the only paper that I resubmitted to SIGGRAPH that was rejected. But it had something like a name like realistic, a generalized realistic rendering or BRDF model of microstructure, right? Boring. Your audience saying, what the hell is he talking about? No, not to your entire audience.
No.
Or maybe you know what I'm talking about. No, but it was not because of the title. But I thought, what is really new in a paper? And it was the first paper where diffraction effects, like your CD, right? Old people like me remember CDs, remember even LPs, bro. Perhaps the hipsters remember CDs. And you had these colorful patterns, right? No one had modeled that. So that was but there was more to that paper than that. But I'm not going to dwell on that because I think you want me to focus more on stable fluids. So anyway, why the title? It was the same thing. I wanted this simple, catchy title. And I got... People kind of made fun of me. Who dare you name your technique like that? Like, sorry, I'm hanging out too much with marketing and sales guys. Maybe. But it stuck. But I have a funny story about that. When was this? 2002? Worked for a company, and it's interesting how the most opposite... But they actually aren't opposites. You have sales and research. You would think research people would never get along with salespeople. It's not true. So I got invited. It's a longer story. But anyway, I went on a tour with in London, England. We went to see many production houses. People who make the special effects. And we're using our Maya software it was that time Maya software. And they kind of tag you along, like, look, we have smart people who think out of the box and they might solve your problems. And so I'm showing my fluid stuff. My latest fluid stuff was in 2002. And someone walks in and he says, oh, is that the Stam solver? And that's the first time I heard it. It's like, of course, you're not going to name your own solver after your name, right? And everybody was like, this is Stam sitting there showing the demo. So it was a cute story. But that was the first time, whatever you want to call it. So I just wanted a simple name.
Got it. Interesting.
Not beyond that. But I want to tell another story about stable fluids, which might interest your audience.
Definitely. But before I tell that story,
sure.
I have one question. In 1999, I think you also worked with a research group called Elias Wavefront, where they had like a 3D camera, and then basically a user could interact with or make some hand gestures, and basically the fluid would move with the gestures. How did that work, and how did you come up with the idea, but also stable fluid, because you were talking about you delving into all this mathematics of Navier-Stokes, turbulence, and so on. What was the objective of your papers? Was it more research on real CFD, or was it more like how can we make it computationally efficient for games, for example?
Yeah. So I've always been a big fan of interaction. And so now this is taken for granted that if you change the parameters of your rendering model, you see the effect right away on your screen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for an artist, that's exactly it. Right? If you apply paint to a canvas, you see the effect right away. You're not going to say, oh, I'm going to paint or see airbrush or whatever, brush or sculpture. Oh, I'm going to paint this, and I'm going to wait one night to see what the effect is. That is not the creative process. So for me, creativity was always more important than scientific. I mean, why would I compete, or I don't even want to use that word, with rocket scientists at NASA and people who build bridges? That was not my interest. My interest was to bring, I even had a talk in Paris, it was called, bringing fluid dynamics to the masses.
Mm-hmm. Democratizing.
Sort of, that can summarize what I wanted to do.
Mm.
But first of all, for myself to understand things. I'm going on a tangent. So your question was?
It was about the interaction that you've done with the Elias Wavefront, which is now part.
So
which is now part of Autodesk, I believe, right, Jos? It's now part of Autodesk. Elias Wavefront. Is it still existing?
No, they were okay. So you want to know the story very briefly? So I used to work for Alias in Toronto. Then I got acquired by Wavefront, and Alias got acquired by SGI, Silicon Graphics, which maybe some people never heard of, but it used to be the hottest company in Silicon Valley at the point. And so they merged Wavefront and Alias from Toronto, Wavefront from Santa Barbara. And they were searching for a name, and they ended up as Alias Wavefront. At least Alias got first. But, so that is,
we're talking,
sorry, I'm losing.
We're probably talking about the interaction part.
Yeah, the interaction part is just, that's what I'm interested in, giving tools that are interactive. Because that's how artists work. You don't want to set up all the parameters, push a button, and see your result. Maybe that's some weird performance art thing, right? What is art anyway? But I'm talking about creative ways of creating new imagery. That's what I'm interested in. So I ended up creating tools to create that. And so my focus was always on interactive. And interactive simulations are also cool because it allows you to explore many cases. So if you try to debug code, you have to explore many cases, right? Usually you hire many people, Q&A, right? They test all your code. If you have an interactive application, the bug's going to show up really fast. So that's kind of a cynical reason for doing this. No, but for me, it was more creating tools for artists where they can immediately get the feedback. And it turns out that using physics, see, I'm not religious about you have to use physics, you have to use science, whatever. There are many techniques in computer graphics that don't use any physics. But I find physics still has a relationship to, we can get into this deeper, but what is real, right? But physics has been tested, like the Navier-Stokes equations are these equations that I used. And it's a great framework to think about fluids. It's principled, it's based on mathematics. And the other problem if you're not using principled methods is, when do you know if it's a bug or it's something more conceptual? But if you base yourself on things where you can think about, that's sort of my beef about neural networks. It's like people don't understand what's going on. So but it opens up a whole new area and of research, right? I'm not denigrating it at all. I'm just saying it's safer to rely, especially if you're trying to simulate natural phenomena, to base yourself on techniques that are pretty well established.
Yeah.
Except for turbulence, it's... So I base myself... But the Navier-Stokes equations are not simple. When I first saw them, I didn't understand them, even though I have a degree in math. And I think the greatest insight, except for the backtracing semi-Lagrangian, what's not called, was that you can decompose the equations. You can solve one term after the other. So you can focus on one term of the Navier-Stokes equation. And that's a great way to debug your code. So first I implemented diffusion. Diffusion is pretty obvious what it does, right? You have a blob of paint, it diffuses isotropically. And if it totally blows up, there's something wrong with your code, because the mathematics tells you it's completely stable. Okay? So those are sanity checks. So anyone who wants to code stable fluids from scratch, without downloading my 100 lines of C code, start with the simple terms and slowly validate your code that way.
Very interesting. Maybe let's move us a little bit away from stable fluids. You are also receiving an Oscar, which I think is a very interesting story. Could you tell people why you received an Oscar in the first place, and what was this whole thing all about?
Well, I actually got 3 Oscars.
That's true, yeah.
So, the first one was in 2006. Second one, 2008, was actually for stable fluids. And then recently, well, sort of recently, 2019, I got another one. And so the first one was for subdivision surfaces.
Yeah. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so the best way to explain it is, how do you go from a cube to a sphere? What you do is you cut corners. And you do it over and over and over and over and over, and then you get something smooth. So it's kind of bridging the gap between discrete polygonal models and smooth surfaces, which actually don't exist. It's just a mathematical model. Because in the computer, your surface is never smooth. It's either pixels or floating points in your computer. But anyway, it's fun to bridge again. So that's a subdivision surface. You start with something rough. It's kind of like in sculpture, you can either add matter, like with clay, or with a piece of marble, you can subtract, right, and create a figure. So you get a piece of marble or stone, And implicitly, there's an amazing sculpture behind it. And the way you get there is by chopping off pieces, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of what I was talking about, chopping off the corners. Because in my research, I always try to simplify things and explain the core of the problem. That's how you can advance. So anyway, so subdivision surfaces were invented in 1973-74 by Ed Catmull and Jim Clark, who was actually the founder of Silicon Graphics. And Ed Catmull is the founder of Pixar. So it's two pioneers came up with this scheme, this method of creating surfaces. And that was basically by refining an approximation, which is a polygonal surface. And then if you do it over and over and over and over, it sort of shrinks your initial approximation, something, to a smooth surface. Okay? And it wasn't used because it was too expensive at the time. And so when I joined the Seattle office, when I did the stable fluids, just as a side project, actually, it's kind of funny, I was supposed to work on subdivision surfaces. I knew nothing about it. So, I like to take challenges. First of all, I moved from Finland to Seattle, which, if people lived in both places, is almost completely different. I won't go into details. Both places are amazing. So I came to Seattle because I wanted something different. And I wanted to live in the US. And and I wanted to study something different. So it was they had a group there, and what attracted me too is that they're mostly mathematicians. It was a company based in Seattle, and Seattle in the late 90s was pretty cool. Now I don't know, but so there were a lot of mathematicians, and they were working on something new called subdivision surfaces. So I'm like, yeah, that interests me. So I got a job there for Alias Wavefront. And I knew nothing about subdivision, right? The basic concept was, like I told you, like take a cube, cut off corners, and you get a smooth surface. Okay. Of course, there was a lot of research being done. But in I don't want to brag, but I'm just making this point because sometimes not knowing a subject, coming in and asking stupid questions, which I did, but I'm not afraid of it. They can call me stupid. It's like, okay, enlighten me pretty much in everything. I don't care.
I like that. That's good.
Yeah, well, that's the child you were talking about. You just walk into places and what's going on here? I want to know. And then you can have a discussion at the level. But anyway, there was a super friendly group. I mean, this group of Seattle was amazing. First of all, they were all mathematicians. So it was amazing. And, they're a different bunch of people, but they're... because I'm a math guy at heart, I think. But anyway, and they were always like, subdivision is weird. And maybe for your audience, maybe they know about B-splines.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. If you're working with CAD modeling.
I'm just going to be a little bit technical right now.
Mm-hmm.
So what I figured out is, I knew B-splines, of course, like any graphics researcher works at Salt knows about B-spline nerves, blah, blah, blah. So those are the realm of continuous surfaces. Okay? And then we have these subdivision surfaces, which start with a polygonal model and then turn them into the realm of continuous surfaces. But the dogma at the time was subdivision surfaces are different from the continuous models, like the NURBS and the B-splines, because you cannot evaluate them. anywhere on this, everywhere, right? For a polygonal mesh, you can do it at the vertices and then interpolate linearly, but that's not the true surface you get after a lot of subdivision. So what I showed is that, first of all, subdivision surfaces, their beauty was that you can handle any surface. So for nerves and B-spline, it worked really well for rectangular patches.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you have a flat surface, it's great. But if now you're patching together like cloth, right? Then it gets very difficult. You have to do trimming, and it gets very complicated. But with a mesh, you can represent any type of topology, any kind of shape, but it's discrete, and you want a smooth surface because you want to render it and everything in computer graphics. And so what I showed is that these discrete surfaces that you then get, that lead to a smooth surface, actually you can evaluate them right away using new basis functions. It's very mathematical. If you go to my 98 paper, it involves eigenvalues, for those of you who know what it is. I'm sure a lot of your audience knows what it is. It involves eigenvalues because if you go in the eigenvalue space, you diagonalize your matrix, and then taking powers is very easy. That's the key idea. And maybe I can tell you how I came up with this idea.
Go for it.
I was preparing a talk for Eurographics in '97, and I had this paper on the turbulent motion of trees. What I was using is, so a tree is a structure, and you can do a modal analysis on it. All right. So a tree, you have the first mode is just the average, and then you add more and more modes, and then you have a cutoff. And so these modes are actually eigenvalues, and the corresponding structures of the trees are the eigenvectors. Maybe I lost a lot of people. But anyway, that's
what you mean.
So it came from a completely different problem. A paper that was accepted at Eurographics I was preparing for. And it was like exactly the same math that you can use for subdivision surfaces. That's a true story. That's what inspired me to do that. So
that's really, really inspiring, Jos. So you got one Oscar for that one, right? Subdivision surfaces?
Oh, yeah. No,
actually two.
Actually two.
Two, okay.
So I got the first one with Ed Capel, the founder of Pixar, and Tony DeRose. That was in 2006. For this work and other work, I'm known for stable fluids, I guess. But I've done many papers on subdivision survey. You can find on my webpage. And other things. Like I even wrote a paper on fluids on subdivision surfaces in 2003. So anyway, I combined research. And so the second one was in 2008 for fluids. So the reason I got it, not me, it was my co-workers, Duncan Brinsmead, Judy Pecans, and Martin Mariner. Those are the ones who implemented it in Maya. So a technical Oscar, right, is you have to prove that it had an influence on motion pictures. So having put my fluid solver in Maya, it was used in many movies. Right? I have a whole list that you give in my talks. So. And sometimes it's hard to recognize if they used my solver or our solver. But it was based on my initial idea I had in Seattle. And so, yeah, we got it for that. And then 2019, we got again with Ed Capel and Tony DeRose, we got an upgrade. So we actually got a statue. because usually when you get a technical Oscar, it's my wife calls it a menu. It looks like a menu. It's not a statue. It's not. So in 2019 we got a. It's not the. Actually, I can say I got 4 Oscars if you want to stretch it. The Maya software I worked for got an Oscar in, I believe, in 2002. So in our office, we had the actual statue. It's really heavy. If ever you...
I never got an Oscar, unfortunately.
No, but you never, from the people you interview and stuff, you never got to hold one? No, anyway, it's really heavy. But, so anyway, yeah, I got 3 technical Oscars. But I also got the Achievement Award in 2005 in computer graphics, which is, I guess, for one of the biggest awards you can get in terms of researcher, right? And it was this work on subdivision and fluids. So
nice, really, really interesting.
So that was before the Oscars.
Yeah,
it's kind of you get one award and then you get more and more awards.
Were you annoyed by it? It seems like you were annoyed by it.
Sorry?
It seems like you were annoyed by it. You said like you get more and more awards. Was that something that you...
No, not at all. I'm going to tell you something. So I got the Achievement Award, right, in computer graphics.
Mm-hmm.
My dream was always from SIGGRAPH, right? Was always to get papers at SIGGRAPH and everything. And all of a sudden you get the biggest award. And when I got a phone call about it, and I said, oh, cool. I said, well, you don't have to accept it. It's like, yeah. Sure, I'll accept it. Not trying to be cool, but that's not why I'm doing research for awards. But I realized that it was great for my parents, my family, more so the Oscars, I think. Some people are like, what do you mean you won an Oscar? I didn't see you in any movies. You don't remember the 6'8" guy in Lord of the Rings? No, I'm joking. Actually, I almost got offered a role in a Weta movie, but that's another story. I was too short.
Oh, wow.
That's what they told me. Yeah.
So, I know you have a ton of more stories to tell us, and then maybe we can do a second part. Second part in the future, I would be very happy to do that. But with regards to time, Jos, I would have a few questions left, maybe 4 or 5 questions, and then we can wrap it up. One question would be, which we got from a big fan of yours via Twitter, is, would you think that the papers that you have written in the past, for example, stable fluids, would be accepted nowadays in SIGGRAPH? Do you think they would accept it? Because it seems that nowadays the paper go in too much weird directions, I would call it, and put too much emphasis on stuff that's irrelevant. Because your paper was kind of simplistic from its idea and from its principles. So would you say nowadays SIGGRAPH would accept your paper or papers?
Now I can tell my story. So stable fluids was the paper with the lowest scores that got accepted. So it almost didn't get accepted. So I have to explain the system for people who don't know. Because I've been on the committee. So you have a committee for SIGGRAPH. You get papers and you assign other reviewers, tertiaries, usually 3. And there's the primary and the secondary who are at the committee. It used to be like that. I don't know. I haven't been on the committee for a while. And the scores were very low, which is a great sign of a great paper. Great papers don't get accepted. But I was lucky mine got accepted at SIGGRAPH. So I was able to show my demo. So anyway, nothing has changed. My paper could have been rejected. When was that? What is it now? 23 years ago? And I thought it was a great paper. People still think it is. But I have nothing against the people who gave me low scores. You know, it was just something, I don't know.
Maybe they didn't have the vision for? You did, but
no, I don't think so.
What do you think it was?
Why it got so low?
Because it not only feels in your case. I've heard it from other researchers as well, that sometimes when they get a low score, they get a paper rejected. It feels a bit weird. It feels like everything has to be peer reviewed. If it's not peer reviewed, then it's not accepted, if you get what I mean. Like the whole concept of science and academics.
Peer reviewed is good because, especially with SIGGRAPH, I mean, I guess people say you're lucky, right? Jos, you're lucky you got these awards, and I don't know about lucky. I seem kind of laid back and stuff, but I work pretty hard. So to get luck, you have to try many, many, many times. And so, but I guess I got lucky that time. But people would have found out about stable fluids, maybe. I don't know. I almost didn't submit it that year. There's another story I can tell. I went to this exhibit in Seattle at the Henry Art Gallery, for those of you who know. And it was an exhibition about controlled demolition with some German artists. And because I was working on other things, right? And I had this stable fluid thing. It's a lot of work to write a paper, especially on your own. And I saw the controlled demolition and say, holy shit, I can do this. It's my solver. And so that convinced me to write it up as a paper and submit it. It's funny how that's why going to art galleries can help, you know.
What's your general recommendation, Jos, for researchers? Maybe just a very short 1 or 2 sentence answer. Your recommendation to researchers who might be struggling, got a paper rejected, what would your advice be to them? Or maybe you giving advice to your younger Jos, to the younger Jos Stam, if he was on the phone, what would you tell him as a researcher or upcoming researcher?
The younger Jos Stam will probably tell me to shut up. No, but I don't know. Advice is tricky, you know, because you can't.
The story is different. The story is different.
Story is different, but and your question was how to get a paper at SIGGRAPH. It's very cynical.
No, not actually how to get a paper there, but maybe if a researcher got a paper rejected and they feel a bit demotivated.
Tricky. It depends on your goal, you know. So my goal was pretty clear. I wanted to advance the field of computer graphics, and I thought the best way of communicating my research was through SIGGRAPH. Okay. And SIGGRAPH used to be different at the time too. It's much bigger. Every presentation, you could follow every talk. There were no parallel sessions. Every talk was in a huge room, and your face used to be on a big screen. It was pretty daunting, especially my first talk in '93. But anyway, advice, geez, it's hard. Depends what you want in life, you know.
Yeah.
For me, there was no question. I wasn't interested in money, for example. So if you're doing computer graphics to make a lot of money, good luck. I don't know. No, I mean, it depends how much money.
Yeah, maybe to reframe that question.
Sorry?
Go ahead. Maybe to reframe that question, instead of giving advice, Jos, maybe negative experiences that you had. And maybe from that you learned. So maybe you could give us your negative experiences rather than me asking what would your life advice would be or your advice for researchers. So what were your negative experiences and what did you learn from them? Maybe 2 or 3, to name a few.
Oh, negative experiences. See, I'm a pretty positive guy. I sort of learned from my mistakes. I hope so. Not always. So I usually turn a negative into a positive. Because if you do not learn of it, you're bound to make the same mistakes. And sometimes what you thought was a mistake was actually the best thing that ever happened in your life. You know?
That's good. I like that. Yeah.
So you know what I mean? Like leaving Autodesk was tough because I had been there many years. And nothing against Autodesk, nothing against ASV. They've been amazing. But a change was great. So working for NVIDIA, especially since they had the AI side, was a good change. Yeah. But I don't know, 2-3 experiences in my personal life, yes, and I don't want to talk about it here.
Okay.
But in research, no, but you learn from experiences. Everybody does, especially at my age. But generally, you just cope with it, Sorry, I can't name specific examples of research. Maybe I should have written the first version of diffraction shader better. And actually, I learned from it because I talked about this paper, diffraction shader, and I submitted it in 97. It got rejected for 98, but got accepted for 99. And I learned a lot. I didn't write it the right way. But from the criticism, I learned, completely rewrote it. Not just took into account, this, that's the process right now. Well, maybe that's advice to researchers. So your paper gets rejected, okay? And there are comments. And then you resubmit. And you answer the criticisms, right? And it still gets rejected, right? My approach is more, okay, let's start all over. Same idea, but let's present it in a completely different way. So that worked for me. So I learned from I shouldn't have written it this way. I learned from it, if I write it this way, and this interesting, in 1999, diffraction shader paper got accepted right away with top marks. 5, 4.5. The highest is 5, the lowest is, 0. And it got accepted right away. Stable fluids, lowest scores, they got accepted that year. So you don't know. It's really, and you can call it luck, but to me, it's you have to try. You have to have a lot of energy and be tough, man. You get
That's
a lot
good
of
advice.
criticism. It's like artists, like writers, they get a lot of criticism. If you believe in your stuff, you can get it through.
Love it. So, you know what they say, Jos, right? The harder you work, the luckier you get. That's what they say, at least.
So Thomas Edison, right? The cliche. What is it? Inspiration. Whatever. I forgot his quote now. So 99% is perspiration and 1% is inspiration, or something like that. It's very true. And I can tell you because people say, it's also funny, a lot of my papers are single author. Not all of them. So I'm still able to work with other people. But doing everything yourself, I even had some people joke, you probably have a basement full of coders to do your work. That's the greatest compliment ever. So because
it is.
A fluid solver can be written in 100 lines of code. So I don't need many people.
That's a compliment.
It's kind of arrogant, but
no, I like it though. 2 more questions, then I'll wrap it up, or maybe 1 more question. And with the current development, maybe also all the GPUs become way stronger, and you can basically simulate hundreds of millions of voxels in real time. Do you still pay attention to the current development in computer graphics, and do you still draw inspiration from that, Jos?
Yeah, of course. Parallelism. We haven't even talked about AI, but that's okay.
Second part in the future, then.
When I will be in Holland, in Eindhoven.
Yeah.
So what's interesting with the advances in hardware is that old algorithms that were considered too slow, but they're very simple, very straightforward, are now possible. So I think it's a good idea to look at older papers and like a subdivision, for example. It was abandoned in the 70s because it's not efficient. We have NURBS and polygonal surfaces and everything. So it's good to, I think that's the main lesson from all this new hardware. But am I involved in current developments in hardware? No, because I'm not a specialist. Unless NVIDIA gives me a math problem and says, can you solve this for us? Maybe. But definitely advances in hardware open a lot of possibilities. Like ray tracing, right? Mm-hmm. A little pitch for NVIDIA here. RTX, for example, right? You have ray tracing on hardware. And it adds a lot of realism in many games.
Definitely. Yes, we have so much more to talk about, but as I said, with regards to time, we'll keep it at part 1, but I'm promising the audience, if you're in Eindhoven or if we meet in Switzerland, who knows, we'll definitely record a second part. I would be more than happy to do that. And I would like to wrap up the podcast session with one message I received from a guy from the computer graphics community. His name is Morten, and I would like to read it to you, to give you some last words from Morten. He said, make sure to give him a huge collective thank you from the entire computer graphics and simulation community, both real-time and offline, for effectively providing the basis that every single CG-oriented fluid simulator is based on for nearly 3 decades by popularizing the operator splitting method, along with, as we talked about, semi-Lagrangian advection. There really isn't a single simulation software or paper in the games or film industry out there that cannot trace its roots back to his work from the late 90s, one way or another. That's what I received from a fan of yours.
Yeah, I get, not to brag, but I get a lot of letters like that. No, it's very
That's
nice,
really cool.
Because this technique has aged pretty well. It's pretty robust. In fact, in my talks, I challenge people, write a shorter fluid simulator in C, because they're higher order languages. And I think you mentioned someone who wrote a Solver in Julia, for example.
Exactly.
And I have written solvers in JavaScript and stuff, and Python. No, it's very nice. And I want to tell you, I went to a conference at Eurographics, and there are many young guys. I mean, when I say young guys, it's 22 years old, 21. Came up to me and said, "Are you Jos Stam?" Yeah, I just implemented your stable fluids. It's amazing, man. I learned about partial differential equations, and it was nice to hear. You know,
must feel good.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback. You know,
definitely. Yeah. With that, Jos, we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really much appreciate you taking the time being here. I hope the interview wasn't delving too much into your
personal life. Thank you for listening to all my stories. I still have 1,000 of them.
That's why we will have a second part and a third part, maybe
in Eindhoven.
Yeah, hopefully. Jos, with that being said, thank you so much. I wish you an awesome rest of the day.